The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Please take your seats.
Everybody take their seats. Can I get everybody to take their seats? Wow, that's unusual. So, welcome to the Senior Leader Panel. This is a great group that we have brought together to sort of follow up with some of the themes that we saw in the earlier discussion with the Commandant and the CNO. And I think that this group, this August group is really impressive. And when we go through their bios, I mean, you see this is a very high quality group. And I think that what we want to try to do in this session is allow you to interact with them to some degree. So you'll find folks with cards that are going to be passed out at your desire. Raise your hand or whatever, and then they'll be collected in the middle of the opening comments and brought up to me, and I'll screen them. So up front, I would ask you a couple things with regard to the questions. There has to be a question inside the piece of paper. So it's not a statement, it's a statement of thought or whatever. We do want to have real questions. I'd ask you to keep them pretty high level because of the depth and vertical nature of this panel, and they have to be respectful. They also need to not dig down into some weed, why my program didn't get selected or something like that. We're not into the programmatics. We're not really, we're here to talk about, medium, high level kind of issues. And so as a screener, you won't find those get by the screen. So, but this is a great opportunity to have a dialogue as opposed to what we did this morning where I collected ahead of time. But this group is representative of a whole range of things. We've got NATO, Air Force, Navy, and Army, Marine Corps, all here. We have also a mix of acquisition and other operational kind of folks. So there's a real good mix of things here in terms of ability to answer your questions. And I think that I'm going to challenge you to help me challenge them as we go through the next hour and a half. So with that, I'm going to go through, I'm just going to introduce the panel, and then you can understand who they are. First one is Lieutenant General Kevin Iams. He's the Commanding General of Training and Education Command. So again, very high level program. As you saw, General Berger was talking about the effort to consolidate some training at a more high level. We think that's a great move. He started as an F-18 pilot in his career. He's accumulated over 4,000 hours in tactical airframes and has flown over 500 combat missions, 500 combat hours and 270 missions. So again, a really great history here. He's commanded at the squadron, group, and wing level. He deployed multiple times to Operation Iraqi Freedom. He commanded MAR-4 South, the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, was Deputy Commander of the Combat Development Command and Assistant Commandant for Command Development and Integration. And he participated in combat during Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Noble Eagle, and multiple Westpac deployments. So please help me welcome General Iams. Next is another special guest, Lieutenant General Robert Marion. He's the Principal Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. So we're way up in there. He started in a variety of command and staff positions in aviation before he shifted to the Acquisition Corps as an assignment officer in the Acquisition Management Branch of the U.S. Army Personnel Command. But he's got a variety of project and program management involving the UH-60 Black Hawk, a lot of areas where he went to a sort of a exchange tour with industry, with Lockheed Martin, and he was the assistant program manager for the Comanche interoperability and the project office and PEO aviation. He assumed joint command of the Defense Contract Management Agency, Boeing Mesa, Arizona, and then where he was the primary mission was to contract management and the production of the AH-64 Longbow Apache. He was assigned as the Chief Acquisition Management Branch in the Office of Personnel Command and the Army Human Resources Command. He deployed as the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisitions and Logistics Forward, representative for the Defense Assistant Secretary of the Army Procurement. That's a mouthful. He also is assigned as the project manager for cargo helo with PEO Aviation. Later served as program executive officer until he was assigned as the deputy for ASALT and now is in the Pentagon. So please help me welcome General Marion. Next we have Major General Albert Miller. He's the Director of Training and Readiness for the Deputy Chief of Staff of Operations at Headquarters U.S. Air Force. The directorate encompasses 7 divisions and the Air Force Agency for Modeling Simulation, which is here in Orlando. He's responsible for policy, guidance, oversight of Air Force operational training and infrastructure, and operational readiness and reporting. He's a command pilot with more than 4,100 hours in the C-17, KC-135, and the C-12F. He has extensive experience in mobility operations to include airlift, tanker, command and control, and special operations. He's an Air Force strategist and has served as the U.S. Command with the U.S. Central Command, Air Force Central Command, Air Mobility Command, and Headquarters Joint Staff Command. So he's a strategist at heart. That's a tough one. So please help me welcome Major General Miller. So next we have a repeat offender. He was here, I think, in 19. And he's been on VTCs with me with several NTSA events, so we appreciate his constant support. Brigadier General Ilmars Lajin from the Latvian Army is Assistant Chief of Staff, Joint Force Development, NATO Allied Transformation Command. Is a very interesting sort of storyline to his history. He was born in California after his family had left the country, but then grew up in Sweden, schooled in West Germany, ended up returning to the fatherland and joined the Latvian Armed Forces in 1993. So it's a back and forth. He says he's only lived in the United States for 11 months, so that's his roots here. His career with troops has been on every level up to brigade command. He set up an armed forces level joint professional NCO training system, as well was in command of the newly formed NCO Academy. He commanded the 2nd Infantry Battalion. He spent 9 months at ISAF in northern Afghanistan, was appointed as the commander of Land Force Mechanized Infantry Brigade, and then was head of all the land forces as well. During his tenure, he had the pleasure to be instrumental in the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group deployment to Latvia, and the successful integration of more than 8 nations in an effective deterrence force operation. He returned to ISAF, took over the operational level, the Joint Headquarters J357 Plans Branch, and then during his time, he oversaw and supported the development of the nascent Latvian Joint Terminal Air Attack Controller program. So it's a great history for one of our international partners, and we look forward to hearing from him. So with that, I'm going to turn, please help me with it. Welcome. Thank you. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to General Iams and for his opening comments.
Admiral Rob, thank you very much. And in line with your point about repeat offenders, I was back here in 2017 as a CG of TCOM. So I've served as CG of TCOM as a 1-star and a 2-star. Wished that we had more leveraging capability inside our service, as the Commandant alluded to, but be careful what you wish for, because I got what I wished for. Now I'm back as the 3-star. So repeat offender here at ITSEC and in the same job. But I'm really looking forward to working with you all as we look to the future on how we change training to develop a ready, relevant, capable, and lethal DoD for the future. As you heard our Commandant allude to this morning and in several other forums, his force design, vision, and concepts are a process and a vehicle to take our Marine Corps forward. They're not an end state. They're not particularizing what our Marine Corps will look like as a naval expeditionary force in readiness for the future, but they're going to be an iterative process that enables us to at least keep pace with, if not outpace, the current global threats. And today we are facing high-end tech-enabled threats and adversaries with long-range precision munitions enabled by highly capable ISR and other assets that can hold our U.S. forces at risk at ranges that preclude what were formerly avenues of power projection that only we possessed. The Marine Corps is tackling this challenge as we look to the future with these force design operating concepts that are in concert with where the CNO is on distributed maritime operations, as well as our Marine Corps sub-elements of expeditionary advanced base operations and littoral operations in a contested environment. However, with these shifts in focus, not surprisingly, our Commandant and our Marine Corps have looked at our Corps and said that we're not organized, we're not equipped, nor are we trained and postured for the world in 2030. So that means for those in the defense industrial base and all of you here in the audience, as we look at what we're going to do to develop those concepts and capabilities for 2030, what we need to understand is, as the Commandant alluded to, we need to start with training from the forefront. It needs to be baked in up front, not bolted on later. And if you look at his Commandant's planning guidance from 2019, it shows you very much up front, it's force design, a focus on warfighting, and then a transition to training and education. So he's had this in his mantra from the outset. For decades, our Marine Corps has been using an industrial age model to build its Marine Corps. It's time that we mature that model and step with our next generation forces and assets as we look at a multi-domain force, a multi-spectral threat, and we generate an information age change for our training capabilities all the way down to the individual rifleman. This needs to occur not just on the training stage, but on the education stage and the individual performance as well. If the old adage, we fight as we train, is really a truism, then we need an environment that replicates the resolution and the sensory fidelity to generate perceptions and reactions approaching those that we expect in the current world and in the real world of the future. To achieve this, what the Marine Corps is looking for is we're seeking a more immersive training venue to truly pique the senses and greater numbers of simulation events. Sets and reps build experience, but they're not going to build what we need for the learning model just in itself. We need to drive decision-making under the most austere and complex environments. We also need these environments to be adaptive with a wide gamut of free play that allows commanders and the Marines to explore new concepts, capabilities, and try out their TTPs so that now they have an opportunity to seize on and maintain initiative where they haven't before, to face uncertain risk and understand imperfect results. This is why we want to record. And then we need to accept, learn, and move on from mistakes. Now, advancements in training systems and synthetic capabilities, and again, I've seen them for years, have been plagued by proprietary standards and architectures across the services and across DoD, which has reduced our capability to truly be interoperable and integrate our assets. I will tell you that our Marine Corps is committed to leveraging the open standards. We intend to, and I'll use the word, Bob, exploit the Army and our sister services and their research into synthetic training and capabilities. And our own live virtual constructive capabilities for the future are going to be built on the foundations that our sister services are developing at this time. But we must strive for a common set of standards, models, and emulations to build efficiency in the program. Machine language, software barriers, and parochialisms need to be a way of the past. We need to help industry, and industry needs to help us build agile, stacked technologies that train Marines all the way from our strategic lance corporals up to commanding generals, and to interface not only with our own Force Design 2030 assets, but all of the future joint assets in simultaneous integrated events that exercise the entire joint force. Training to this standard as our nation's stand-in force will require a collaborative, best-of-breed atmosphere. We're looking for partners across industry and the services that will facilitate rapid advancement in these environments. The Corps' research into the threats and into force design had demonstrated that our future training environment will require knitting together large tracts of training space for weapons and those platform capabilities that the CNO talked about, as well as we do need that updated adversary replication for platforms, their multi-domain capabilities, and as well, we need an opportunity to include the ever-increasing integration of high-end assets. That's all of the SAP and the STOW, all the way down to the tactical level. We believe that this necessitates synthetic training domains, enclaves, if you will, where we can generate effects inside those enclaves and then play them into the larger picture so that we can conceal our playbook from the prying eyes and exploitation and then still enable full play. I believe that the synthetic LVCT environment is the only place that we'll be able to put all of our assets on the table, exercise all of them with all of the bells and whistles that we know hide behind the black curtains. As well, we need to train a different Marine for the future, and this includes looking at human performance in a way that we have never done it before. We're updating our training design and our operational techniques to accompany our future simulation modernization events, and our initial forays into this regime should start to play out with LVCT sometime in the 2024 timeframe. We think that LVCTE will be the underpinning of our Marine Corps training environment for the future and will be just one of 5 initiatives that we've got going forward. It will encompass a holistic enterprise of ground, air, and maritime training capabilities, including full instrumented training ranges, both live and force-on-force, immersive multi-domain training regimes with live role players, high-fidelity simulators, and command and control system emulations that mirror real-world networks in operation. So in closing, our future training systems must replicate a vast and complex future battlefield and develop the cognitive capabilities of our future leaders. There's only one training regime that does this. You all hold the reins to it. It's that of the synthetic and LVC. We look forward to working with you, but as the Commandant alluded to, we must work faster. We're on a pacing threat timeline that 2030 was the initial mark on the wall. It's moving to the right, but it's moving much faster. I look forward to joining forces with you and taking on the challenge. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you. So before we go to the next speaker, I have to correct a faux pas, a terrible moderator faux pas, which is to skip Rear Admiral Garvin. introduction. So he's the 20th Commander of the Naval Education and Training Command. Started there in July of 2020. His operational assignments include service with the Pelicans at Patrol Squadron 45. He was the 1995 Association of the Naval Aviation Pilot of the Year. He commanded the Fighting Tigers of VP-8, Patrol Wing, Reconnaissance Wing 10, Executive Officer to the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. No easy job there. Commander of the Recruiting Command and Commander of Patrol and Reconnaissance Group and Patrol Reconnaissance Group Pacific in Norfolk. So please help me welcome Rear Admiral Garvin. My apologies. Hopefully not my last mistake, but so over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thanks to the ITSEC team for putting this on. Unlike many of my predecessors who spoke, I am a first-timer here at ITSEC. I've been serving in a variety of acquisition positions over the last couple of years, but have never made it down to Orlando. So I look forward to today and the next day or so of activity and getting to engage with many of you. So when you hear our Chief of Staff of the Army talk about training, he talks about training at the individual level, at the team and crew level, at the squad level, the platoon, and then the company level, and then, of course, battalion and brigade above that. But when he talks about training, he talks about it in the context of a pyramid, and 85% of the resources that we spend, time, money, energy, all of it, in the Army, is to those first three layers at the individual, crew, team, squad level, platoon, and company level. So that's the focus for our Army when it comes to training, and it's about building blocks. It's about cohesive, lethal, well-led, small units, and that's the building block of how we build combat capability in our Army. And I really like something I think the Commandant said it earlier about simulations not just enabling you to operate your individual weapon or maybe even operate as a crew, but a part of these small teams is how well they're led. So how do we train the ability or assess and then design training for how leaders of small units think? And I thought that was, so I've only been here at ITSEC now for about 3 hours, and I've already learned a lot about some preconceptions I came here with. So one of the first things I noticed was when I read the bios of all my peers up here, every person up here is an aviator in their service, with the exception of Ilmar's, who's an infantryman to keep us all straight. But we were talking about that before we came up here, and it's operating in a simulated environment is part of the natural training in Army aviation, and I think across the services. So that's the context that I had, and what I have seen and heard to me is so much more about the possibilities that are available to us, not just in simulations, but and I've used large-scale force-on-force simulations in other contexts, but there's so much more than I came here thinking about. So, as an example, one of the things that we're taking into small units is the ability to, and when people describe it to me, they use the term augmented reality, and it's geo-rectified information that you can look through a set of either night vision devices or even you don't have to use it at night. It can be during the day also, and it gives you situational awareness of your members in your squad, last known positions of enemy forces, the routes, your primary, your alternate, your contingency, your emergency routes. All that is available now. We're making that available to the individual infantryman. But it's something that we've had available in the cockpit of our aircraft for over a decade. And so we're starting to perpetuate that throughout the rest of the force. And so in my mind, I came here with the thought of how do we further the things that we've already done, and how do we do them better? And after I listened to Bob Petty's presentation, it made me think, what could we be doing? Not how do we do what we're doing better? What could we be doing? And so that's really going to be a focus of my time here as I'm engaging with you and when I'm out on the floor, is what could we be doing in the Army to advance us in this space that we probably don't even know about. And there's pockets of excellence probably everywhere out there, and the CNO and the Commandant talked about that as well. We have great stovepipe systems for individual training and maybe even crew training, but at a bare minimum, how do we network those even inside of our service amongst our joint partners and in a coalition environment? And things like Project Overmatch and Project Convergence in the Army, those are going to help in those areas. But again, I think that's nascent in our lexicon, and it's nascent in our actions. And there's so much more opportunity out there that's available to us. And then, and Jennifer alluded to it, and the CNO did as well. We have an opportunity now, and I'll fall back on what I do every day, and it's acquisition. And so we had a way of doing things for a long time, and it was fine. But now we have multiple pathways with which to take capabilities that exist, integrate them in this term we're using called soldier-centered design, getting soldiers on equipment, exposed to capability, provide feedback, and spin faster so that when we do move and field something using some of these other pathways, Jennifer referenced OTAs, that's a way. There's other authorities that we have now inside these adaptive acquisition framework that's now codified in our DoD instructions that we can use and we have been using. Most people talk about middle tier of acquisition, but they're ways to rapidly prototype and rapidly field capability to the services. So we have opportunities and we have authorities now that we've never had before. So, we need your help to describe back to us what we could be doing, and now we have authorities to take advantage of those opportunities. So I look forward to the next day engaging with you and then addressing whatever questions you have. So thank you.
Humble Garvin.
Good morning. Is this thing on? Mic check? Okay, good. Again, like my Army brother here to my left, I am, to use internet parlance, I'm a longtime lurker, first-time poster at ITSEC. So very, very glad to be here. I've tried to get here many years and failed, but this time I made it. So I really appreciate the time. I appreciate being invited to fill in on this panel this morning. It is a true pleasure to be here with you. And I do have prepared remarks. I'll go through them, but what I'm really looking forward to is the conversation at the end once we're all done with our opening remarks. And again, so I represent Naval Education and Training Command in Pensacola, Florida. It is the Navy's largest shore command. And for those that aren't aware, just think briefly street to fleet. So we recruit young civilians, some not so young, off the street and train them into war fighters. So think every accession source, minus the Naval Academy, but ROTC, OCS, boot camp, and then all the schoolhouses, less the War College and Naval Postgraduate School. So all the sort of technical training, and it's a real pleasure to work for that team. Our sailors are world-renowned for their can-do spirit and their ability to find a way to succeed in the most trying situations, sometimes in spite of the help that they receive. And I've seen it my entire career. They will literally run through brick walls. And it's our challenge to make sure those are the right walls to run through and that we minimize the number of walls we make them run through. They operate in the most remote areas of the planet in peacetime and war, and if a critical piece of gear goes down, our sailors have to be there to fix it. And yet, as we all know, the world is changing faster than ever before, and our sailors who operate at the leading edge of technology face complex new challenges. They require increased access to relevant training and information to effectively do their jobs, not all the way back at the schoolhouse, but where they're working today. So to continue our advantage in the maritime environment and maintain our organic capability to operate and repair complex equipment at sea, we must provide our sailors with the tools and resources required to enable and enhance their skills and proficiency. And I love the fact that CNO used this word, at the point of need. So that's one of the basic tenets of one of our programs I'm going to describe in a minute. In order to do that, our training systems must be more responsive and must support faster cycle times, faster update times to maintain currency and deliver training to the fleet, providing these resources to our sailors so that they have the knowledge and skills and that they don't atrophy. We don't shove it all in their craniums at the very beginning of their career, hoping that they remember it by the time they actually need that knowledge. So the Navy's program, and it's a rather large investment, I think probably not unfamiliar to most in the room, is Ready Relevant Learning. And it seeks to modernize training delivery systems, integrate content development to increase speed to fleet, and implement career-long learning continuums so that we have this life cycle continuum of learning that match the right training to the right point in a sailor's career at the right time while addressing gaps in technical, professional, and leadership training. I thought it was also quite telling and really welcome that CNO mentioned it's not just about technical training, it's about leadership training, it's about professionalism, it's about that ethos that's in every one of us. Now, all these lines of effort are in flight at this very moment. Modernized training has already been delivered for several Navy ratings, that's 8 of them so far, with nearly 50 others currently in progress and at various points in development. As an enterprise, we are constantly looking for ways to deliver this modernized content faster and in a more agile, modular way. Think over your PDA, think however they take in information. Career-long learning continuums are at a similar point in the journey and will provide a process for the Navy leadership to effectively plan training development, identify training gaps, manage training requirements, and prioritize future training development efforts. These CLLCs also restore our senior enlisted as the technical experts on systems and equipment at sea. And we're making great strides in taking advantage of the latest thinking in the science of learning and the training technology that sort of underpins it as well. My Navy HR, which is part of the organization that I'm embedded within, which is the Navy's Human Resource Organization, is undergoing a massive overhaul on our IT systems to deliver an integrated family of systems that modernize pay and personnel, which are very, very important, but also training delivery functions. The key training component is a modernized learning stack of commercial off-the-shelf products operating in the cloud and supported by an authoritative data environment. And again, from a comment this morning, I really liked the fact the Commandant brought up that you can hop on a Peloton and get on there and start your program where you left it. All very true. But then I immediately thought okay, but then I've got to link it to Strava. Then I've got to link it to training, what's the TP? The Map My Run or whatever. Then I got to link it to Garmin Connect. And all those things don't talk to each other because they're all proprietary. So how do we get beyond that? So we don't need to build more towers of Babel there. So that's why I'm really harping on the authoritative data environment, data that is not homogenized, but at least queryable and you know that it's valid. This learning stack will decrease our training timelines and ensure our operational agility, improve our overall mission readiness by delivering information to the sailors' fingertips. And the first launch of the learning stack capability will occur beginning of next year with our new learning management system. And another initiative we're working on is this thing called My Navy Learning. And again, it was talked by both of our service chiefs about the individual nature of training and how that can be queried by the individual and how that can be queried by a supervisor, how that can be queried and aggregated as a battle group commander, as a fleet commander, however necessary. And it's individualized pace and it's individualized training, proficiency, and qualification. So My Navy Learning is the very first part of that journey. These are powerful tools, and it comes back to some of the points that CNO made about recording. Recording in a format that is queryable, searchable, available with disconnected ops, available with denied and degraded ops, all critical information or abilities that we need in our quiver. So if you think about that, you think about what the future of what we could do, to your point, General. I think that's an excellent question. Not how do we do things better. I think we kind of have that path pretty well mapped. but what could we do that is different, that is unique, that is a true step change when it comes to training and education. And again, it goes to making these data-driven, data-informed decisions. Again, not to be, as CNO said, a slave to analytics, but you really do need to pay attention to them. And there is also, I think he paid a nod a little bit to the right brain too, so keeping that thinking going in our leadership. Now, in closing, the Navy is vigorously addressing our need to adapt our training to the dynamic operating environment. We all spoke about the dynamic operating environment. I don't see that changing anytime soon, and we just keep getting thrown curveballs. The question is can we, to use John Boyd, can we observe, orient, decide, and act quicker than our would-be adversaries? We are streamlining and integrating the training development and delivery process to get solutions that support personalized and adaptive training. Again, critical. I think, when we start flight school, in fact, most of us never finish at the same time as guys we started with or gals we started with. I think we need to extend that across all the training continuum. And then we need to mature our training assessments, right? So if we're thinking about not just, to use the Kirkpatrick model, not just to think about, okay, how did we feel about training, how did they test out of the schoolhouse, but how did we change behavior, ultimately with how did we change performance, and then really measuring the performance outcome that is germane to the art and science of war. I think those are the larger philosophical questions I think we can answer with your help. And again, I'm learning here, just like you. I've already learned more in 3 hours, I think, than 3 weeks in the Pentagon. But I'm out of the Pentagon, thankfully, but not for long, I bet. But anyhow, so I just really, particularly with that comment. But anyway, I really do look forward to the conversation. I will be walking around. I'm staying here as long as I possibly can to try to soak it all in. So if I look lost or whatever, just grab me into your booth and tell me what you think we can do together. So appreciate your time.
Thank you. General Miller.
Well, good morning, everybody. General Al Miller, I'm the Director of Training and Readiness for the Air Force, and it's an honor to be here. First, I'd like to thank ITSEC for putting on a world-class symposium. I was here yesterday, had some industry engagements, was out on the floor, and it is impressive, and I've seen the agenda, and as I said, a world-class event, and I'm thankful to be a participant. And again, I am also first time, so very impressed and excited about what I'm going to learn here, as everybody else has said. It's an honor to be up here with the fellow panel members. I could just hit record and play, and you would hear the same thing. I would agree with 99.9% of everything they have already spoken about. I was going to open with a little bit of a joke here, but seeing how many sea service members are out in the audience and discretion being the better part of valor, I'll forego the joke about the Air Force-Navy football game this year.
Go Navy.
So the Air Force, if there is a synergy here between the theme of this symposium, Innovation and Accelerating Training, and what the Chief of Staff of the Air Force penned early on when he first became the chief, his accelerate, change, or lose. I would commend that to you. And he's very specific when he talks about that and gives direction, in that he doesn't want to just say accelerate change. He emphasizes the or lose portion of that. And the reason I bring that up is you asked the question of the CNO and the Commandant earlier this morning of what would you ask or want our congressional representatives to know? And I would tell you that it's not just those folks in Congress, but it would be every citizen. What I would hope they would know is the pacing threat or the pacing challenge and how fast it is accelerating has changed the environment for the Department of Defense. And that is what the Air Force is wholly focused on. When we go to meetings with Secretary Kendall and we go to meetings with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, it is all about that pacing threat and what we're doing to prepare for it, to compete with them, and deter, and if necessary, defeat them. And that is what has changed. So if you heard my title, readiness is part of my portfolio, and when we talk about ready for what, it is ready for that. And If we could get, as my panel members have talked about, somehow get across the proprietary nature of things, which we've had the luxury of being able to operate in that environment where our partners can have proprietary approaches to things. That's because that's the nature of the adversaries we've had for the last several decades have allowed us that luxury where going into the future with our pacing threat and pacing challenge, we cannot operate that same way. We're going to have to work together and team together to find the solutions together so that we can have the ready force to compete and deter the way we need them to. I talk about 5 levers of readiness in my readiness portfolio. So we have the people, they have to have the critical skills availability. We've put them through the tech schools. The aircraft themselves, we have to have the weapon sustainment money so that they're available to fly when we need them to fly. The flight hours are the money that we need to operate the aircraft. The training infrastructure, which includes the ranges, airspace, as well as the simulators themselves and the networks that connect them. And then the tempo or the time for our people to do the high-end training. That's one significant change the Air Force is doing is our force presentation model. You may hear it termed AF4Gen or Air Force Force Generation. What has changed there is we are now preserving time for our airmen to do that high-end training that we have foregone in the past because of the threats that we've focused on over the last couple of decades. Allowed us that privilege to be able to only be ready for that insurgency or violent extremist organization that we've been countering. But now the threat is China, and they are a peer threat, and that requires a different approach to training. And so those 5, training is what pulls that all together. So that's why the Air Force has put training and readiness into one office, and that's what I focus on every single day, me and my team. When we talk about the training that we need, again, it's all 5 levers. You need all 5 levers operating simultaneously. If any one of those levers is falling short, you will not have the readiness you need, and that is how we try to balance all of that. When we talk about the training infrastructure, the aircraft and capabilities that we have today are now exceeding the infrastructure that we've had in place for decades. So we have geographic restrictions. The threats, we have not kept up with the threats, and the adversary is developing threats at a pace that we probably realistically can't emulate or replicate in a live world. And then we also has, as my panel members have mentioned, the OPSEC portion of it. So that it is driving where a lot of the training that we have been doing in the live world is now being driven into a synthetic virtual world because of those restrictions that we have. That's not to say that we're going to forego live training. We see that there has to be a balanced approach with live and synthetic training, satisfying different aspects of what we need in the training environment. You still need to get out there and generate aircraft, operate them so that your maintainers know what they're going to be doing, and the supply chains know how they're going to have to react based on live flying. But in order to preserve OPSEC and execute tactics, techniques, and procedures, and preserve the secrecy of some capabilities that we have, it's driving it into the synthetic virtual world so that our operators can employ those TTPs and preserve the OPSEC that we need. So that is where we are focusing on now because we haven't done it in the past. We've had to now shift to that synthetic virtual environment. The first step in that is SCARS, so Simulator Common Architecture Requirements and Standards. It's led by LCMC-WNS. That is the first step in creating that architecture and in that environment where we can start having data standards and connectivity across all the platform weapon systems. So if you looked at the simulators that we've had in the Air Force for the last few decades, it's not been one enterprise approach. It's been very stovepiped, weapon system-centric approach. They don't talk well together. When we do network them together, It is very hodgepodge, and many times it's when you put on an exercise, you have to get approval for that network architecture exercise by exercise. So SCARS is the first attempt that the Air Force is taking to create that open architecture so that all of our weapon systems can train together in the virtual synthetic world. The next approach that we're taking and where we need your help is, the term is Common Synthetic Training Environment, or CSTE. LCMCXA is pulling together the consortium for that. They held the first industry day here in last month in October, I believe it was, where they pulled together all the industry partners, explained the approach the Air Force is taking to look at trying to pull together all the best of breed from our industry partners to build this common synthetic training environment where you now have one environment where all of the models are in that one environment. So it'll encompass the terrain model, the threat model, the weather model, the electromagnetic spectrum models, and then it's a plug and play or with whoever wants to come into the environment. You can now, with that open architecture, data-centric approach, be able to pull all the different weapon systems into that environment and train at whatever scale you want to train at. The other thing that the Air Force is looking heavily at is we've had bifurcated approaches to test and training. And we see that there's good synergy or potential synergy in pulling both of those requirements in the test world and the training world together to leverage where you can the best of both worlds, if you will, the high fidelity requirements that you need in the test world and the high entity requirements that you need in the training world, be able to create one environment that can adapt quickly. And as I mentioned, that's the one thing we're seeing happen with our adversary is they're developing threats at a pace that in a live world we can't keep pace with them. But in a synthetic digital world, we can emulate threats that we discover, put them into this common synthetic training environment, and then be able to test and train against those and develop the TTPs that we need so that we can be successful in a potential conflict. I look forward to your questions, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be here as the last speaker because I have to change all my notes. But on that note, it's the second time around. Obviously, I did something good last time, so I'm invited again. I'm Ilmar Slange, hard name to pronounce, Latvian Army, however, currently stationed at Norfolk Headquarters NATO SAC-T, Supreme Allied Command Transformation. I'm not here to talk about the challenges and tasks of the Latvian Army, which is to kill 2,000 Russian tanks in 3 days. I can do that later at the bar. I'm here as ACOS Joint Force Development and for NATO. And there is already a paradox in its name. I don't own the force. The nations owns the force. So being the Assistant Chief of Staff of Joint Force Development is quite challenging. And for you who do not know what NATO is also you. 30 nations, United States included, representing 1 billion approximately people in the world. 30 nations still going strong, 72 years old, and still nations want to join. So obviously we're doing something good. And an analogy, probably a bad one, and is like imagine yourself having a Pentagon with 30 services. Some senior, some junior. Yeah, okay, I'll leave you with that thought. Okay, COVID. No one told a COVID story, so I probably have to do that. No, everyone has a COVID story, so I will not bother you with those. Again, that's a story maybe later. But I do want to focus on what COVID or a pandemic as an opportunity vis-a-vis an excuse. In many cases, COVID was acted as an accelerator. And it certainly gave the modeling and simulation and online training and education crowd unprecedented attention. And we all understood that we were not prepared. NATO wasn't prepared. We managed to squeeze in or migrate 30% of our resident courses online. And when my bosses asked me, why only 30? Well, that was a miracle that we did that. And it's not about just pushing 45 PowerPoint slides online. We all know that. It also brought the family together. The pandemic brought the NATO education training facilities and others closer together, realizing that we need to get our act together. But already now, I sense and I feel that this is fading away with a wish to return to the old, to going back to as it was. And I have to flash this one up because as the saying goes, never waste a good crisis. I mean, what's the point of all those Zoom meetings? or the cocktail hours, obviously. But never waste a good series. And I'm very sad when I have colleagues talking about either or, online vis-a-vis residential, brick and mortar, or micro-learning. It's not about either or, it's about and. Together. It's about how to use both worlds. As we heard this morning, the metaverse, whatever it's called in the future, and the physical world, how to use both models the best. And the one who figured that one out will be the winner. I don't say that I have the concept ready, of course not. Okay, NATO is adapting conceptually at the pace and speed of the mutual agreed level of ambition with 30 nations. But the good story is that there is a plan. It started already in 2018 with a new, for 50 years in the making more or less, a new NATO military strategy that was adopted in 2018. And that document conceptually put NATO on a new path. ACO, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, devised a new strategic defense or deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area in Europe, and SACT here in America devised the NATO warfare capstone concept. And yes, it is, some of the negatives in this room will say it's a blue sky document. Yes, of course it is. However, it gives us discipline. It was noted and endorsed by the NAC, by the ambassadors of 30 nations, so the political buy-in is there. And this concept, with its 5 warfighting imperatives, gives us a compass, a North Star. It disciplines us in our devising the future capabilities and what we need for the future. I will return to this a little bit later, because I now want to turn into education and training, which is part of my portfolio as well. I supervise, or my staff supervise, better to say, about 11,000 people training every week. And not only allies, also our partners. And education and training is very close to my personal point of view and feelings. When we discuss technology and emerging technology in education and training, I always bring up the red flag on we not lose focus. There is a big forest out there, and sometimes people cannot see the forest because of all the trees and the flashy new objects, and etc. So I just throw this out there to all of you. It's not about the technology. It's what it enables to do to the individual, to the crew, to the team, the unit, and to a society as such, to the humans to excel, so that we as humans can excel in outthinking our adversary, outpacing our adversary, and outfighting our adversary. I actually like the strategic corporal. I think we should empower him or her more. I'm a little bit more concerned about the tactical minister, but okay, a little bit more about that later. As an infantryman, I still am I'm convinced that the mother of learning is called repetition. But of course I have learned, the real question is what kind of repetitions, and how do you adapt, and how do you tell that the reps you're doing are not the right ones? So that's where the art comes in, and that's where the loop comes in, etc. And that's where we need probably assistance, also complete unbiased AI assistance. So returning to on the NATO warfighting capstone concept, it defines, as I said, it is constructed around 5 warfighting imperatives. I won't bore you with that. But from that, we are now operationalizing it through 25 lines of delivery. And I'll just highlight 3 of them. Persistent preparation, that's the name on a alliance-wide review on how we prepare people and forces. And it's going to take a long while to do that because it's a big thing. I already heard this morning, the U.S. forces, the U.S. services are doing the same thing, so we are on track. But it is something we need to do. Persistent preparation is necessary. We cannot fall back and do what we have done so far. The second one, which is one of my particular favorites, is audacious wargaming. Wargaming, if you are reading, following military discourse in publications, wargaming is the biggest hype the last, I think, 18 months, right? Or at least 2 years. We call it audacious wargaming because we want to try to go away only to not only stay on the technology side, which is wargaming, the different tools, how to enable one, but also put the audaciousness in thinking, the employment of, if you want to call it the art. And the science is the science, but the art is the art, audacious in wargaming. And we are done pretty good progress in this one. Perhaps that down the road there's a new capability program for it, but I'm more interested in getting people on board and think outside the box and create a culture where thinking outside the box is important, but then also being able to play in the box with the technology or the weapon systems we have at hand. For that, we need the right people and the right skills at the right time, and that's an enablement. NATO lends its people from the nations. I am seconded by Latvia for a 3-year tour in Norfolk. Latvia pays my salary, unfortunately, not Norway. But so you see, and how does NATO agree, 30 nations agree, and influence nations to prepare the right people for the right skills, with the right skills for the future? That's also a very audacious task we have to do. I guess the real answer is that we need to come together and talk about this. And the first step is to recognize that we have a challenge. Back to technologies a little bit, and I don't think that we have seen the real results of the pandemic in training technologies. I think that the coders are still in the mom's basements, and we're going to see more and more of that in the future. It's coming out there, and I know that many nations and services, mine included in Latvia, are looking for a silver bullet. It's going to fix everything, a learning management system tool or a synthetic environment tool, etc. And the answer is, from my humble perspective, is that there is no silver bullet. It's how we're going to use it. The ones of you who are old enough to remember Betamax and VHS, the battle between Betamax and VHS, the one who was better technology-wise did not win. It was the one who had the greatest utility because of accessibility and access to what people wanted. So that is a shout out to the industry out there. Look for the accessibility and the utility of it, not perhaps strive for perfection, and you wind up as Betamax. Relevancy is that one. I will finish off, and I think it's always a battle-winning concept to quote your boss. General Lavinet, the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, just recently said, and I'll finish with this, is that, I quote, "We face an uncertain future, but we face it together. Let us thus be bold enough to embrace innovation, smart enough to grow our agility, and open enough to learn from each other. We can only We can win only by working together as a team. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to transition now to our question period. I thank you for the 150 questions that I have up here. So I promise you I won't get to all of them. But we'll start out with a whole stack here. Unfortunately, Lieutenant General Marion is getting credit for the DoD acquisition system. So there's about 9 or 10 questions about what should we do to fix it? Should we use OTAs more? Should we use SIBRs more? Problems with DFARS, leasing versus not. So can you make some, address those as a general?
Sure.
How do you fix it?
So, when I think of the acquisition system, I think of it in 2 ways. One, and we call it from a previous boss of ours, General Bolton, Claude Bolton, who was an Air Force general who became the Army acquisition executive. And he used to call it the big A and the little A. And the little A is the acquisition piece that I think many of those questions are about. FAR, DFAR, adaptive acquisition framework, things that you would recognize, preliminary design review, critical design review, milestone A, milestone B, full rate production decision, all that kind of stuff. Important and necessary for thinking leaders to make good decisions based on the context that they're dealing with. So should we use more SIBRs? Should we use more OTAs? Should we use more fixed price? Should we use more cost? Those types of things. The answer is it depends, right? It depends on the context of which you're dealing with for, which tool to use. So to me, the more relevant question is, how do you align the requirement, the resources, and the acquisition strategy that many of those things are discussing, or the ACT plan, how you're going to procure the item? How do you align those 3 things to get the best outcome in the time that we need the outcome by, right? One of the things that's been said, I think the CNO and the Commandant talked about it, and Kevin talked about it, and it's the pace, right? We're not in a comfortable position right now in terms of pace. And I tell people all the time, PMs and PEOs, the only thing I can tell you about the pace of the bureaucracy that we deal with, and I don't mean bureaucracy in a negative way, I just mean in big organizations, right, is that pace won't be sufficient for your need, right? So you have to practice what I call professional impatience in dealing with whatever situation you find yourself in. And the way I've seen that work best is by aligning whoever owns your requirement with your strategy and resource it, and then hold people accountable. In general, I'd say if you just address one of those things, you're not going to get the outcome that you want. You can have the best acquisition strategy in the world, and if it's not resourced and the requirement's not defined, you're not going to get the outcome you want. So you have to have all 3 of those things aligned, and then you have to have someone with enough understanding of what opportunities and authorities they have to make the right decisions on behalf of whatever outcome they're trying to achieve. And so a lot of times I hear people say, I'm thinking outside the box, right? And so when I ask a couple questions, I find out they really don't know what's inside the box anyway, right? So you have to know, you have to be professional in your approach and your schooling and your understanding and your experience and your training to have the wisdom and discernment and judgment it takes to make the right decisions in the context of those 3 things. So if I get asked a lot, do we use OTAs too much? Are we defaulting too much to fixed price environments today? And it just depends. It depends on what you're trying to do, what outcome you're trying to achieve. And then I think you just have to align the leaders in those 3 areas to get the outcomes that you want. So I'll pause and see.
If I could jump in there, I'd agree with
Sure.
everything. I think there's also an element of risk that has to be acknowledged with all of these decisions. And so if you've read the General Brown and General Berger penned an article about accepting near-term risk today so that we can have the resources for the modernization that we need, so that we have the capabilities and capacity that we need in the years that we need it to deter that pacing challenge, right? And so part of the acquisition strategy, and it needs to be holistic, right? It can't be stovepipe to, this is my acquisition program, and I need to be wholly focused with blinders on to everything else that's going on. It needs to be a holistic approach. And there may be some things that we put on the cutting room floor out there, but it's for the greater good of the nation that we take that risk today and defund some things that we're trying to do today and accept the risks today so that we can have the acquisition strategy for the modernization that we need so that we can compete and deter tomorrow.
Yeah,
Any
we think
other-
about modernization
Go
in the
ahead.
context of future readiness, right? So
Right.
it's current readiness and future readiness, and where are we going to accept risk?
How do we balance that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So for Root Emil Garvin, the question is, how will NETSI integrate VR/AR trainers into ready, relevant learning and the process and learning management systems to feed that readiness?
Yeah, no, and I promise I didn't plant that question because we're already doing it. And you can go to any number of schoolhouses. Just go to the one over by me in Pensacola, and you look at what they're doing with the multi-reconfigurable training system, the MERTS, and then you look at what they're doing with VR. And you know, you can walk through a ship virtually and find the box you're looking for. It's probably a little easier in VR because you're not tripping over things. But again, it builds the right sight picture. So the future's very, very bright there. I am mindful of the admonitions that were stated earlier about not being too entranced by shiny objects. It's really about what the outcome is. But I am fascinated with the way VR, AR, and then the technologies that support it and the API statements underneath can really get after that. Okay, is it really getting in there? Is it really affecting behaviors and performances and outcomes? That I am enamored with. And again, big fan of virtual reality, live virtual constructive, big fan of, you've got my own Oculus, all that stuff, but I want to know what the outcome is. And so if somebody can show me that and then you demonstrate that in a repeatable fashion, I think that's where Nirvana lies.
Okay. Anybody
Sorry, I
else?
keep wanting to steal the microphone here. I have a vignette from the Air Force. So when I went through pilot training many years ago, the way you used to do chair flying was you had a poster of your flight instruments, you taped that to the wall, you took your toilet plunger and you stuck that in front of your folding chair,
Right.
and you mentally flew through the profile that you were going to do the next day in your pilot training sortie. Today, Air Education Training Command in the U.S. Air Force is using VR and AR to greatly enhance that process of chair flying. They give these to the students when they come in, and they tell the vignette that they had a student pilot that used these tools, and then on their very first ride, it's commonly referred to as the dollar ride, that student went up, did all of the pre-flight, taxi, takeoff, getting the clearances, departing the airspace, flew to the auxiliary field, did some approaches, flew to the area where they do all their maneuvering, did the recovery back to the field, and the instructor pilot didn't have to say in a word the entire profile. That was how good the tools were that they had provided that student pilot, that the instructor pilot was able to sit there quietly and just observe throughout that first ride of a student pilot in pilot training.
Yeah, so just to steal the mic back to pile on, same in the Navy. I don't have that vignette. I haven't yet met that pilot, but we do have, and again, it goes back to one of the things that General Berger talked about, which is allowing for innovation, allowing for these really, really bright young men and women that are coming into our force to innovate and empowering them to do so. So we have this thing called the Navy Introductory Flight Experience, which is ultimately it's before they ever get in an airplane, right? It's their ground school. Then these young men and women that were over there said, hey, to the CEO of the schoolhouse, for not a lot of money, I could build a Cessna simulator right here for you. And so basically COTS went out, did it, and this thing is amazing. So the first time they hop into the Cessna isn't the first time they've hopped into the Cessna. And again, that's all precursor to the T6 Texan, right? So the idea behind Knife was to let them drive a little bit less powerful car before they hop in the sports car. And again, it goes to not only training efficiency, right? So the number of sorties your young man or woman had to fly, much less to get to qualification, but also goes to training effectiveness, which I really think is the most important takeaway from really taking advantage of AR and VR. Again, to your point, General, it's not either or, it's both. And finding that knee in the curve where the right amount of simulation and the right levels of true augmented reality or virtual reality versus the physical world, that's where I think we can make a lot of money when it comes to not just efficiency but effectiveness.
Well, and Pedro, when you're talking about learning effectiveness, one of the things that the Marine Corps is looking at is not all learners are the same. So we think about training and education for the future. Yes, we're dealing with digital natives right now, and most of the folks in this room are really excited about that next generation, and we're focusing on them. Not all of them are learn best through digital means or looking at a tablet. What we need to understand is that everybody responds differently to different learning modalities. So yes, many of us grew up in an industrial age. We love book learning. That's just how we came to education and knowledge. Some still do. We need to recognize early in a Marine, sailor, airman, Coast Guardman, soldier's career what type of learner they are, and then tailor learning specifically to that individual at pace and at scale. The deeper that we can implant the learning, sooner, faster, better, stronger, the better force that we're going to be able to generate in the future. So some of the things that we're looking at for the future is, again, how do we template different types of learners out there? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Are you a reading learner? Are you a visual learner? Place you into those learning modalities with instructors who are tailored to be able to deliver that material at the right scope and scale. And again, so that we can pace folks, the quick ones, get them in and out of the curriculums faster so that we can generate the force sooner.
Okay, well, I think that there's the aviation element here is obvious. I mean, we are involved with Pilot Training Next and with all the efforts that are going on, both Project Avenger. We're also trying to do something to drive that kind of training down into the college and high schools and trying to start a process of recruiting way back to where we identify, give them an opportunity to get into an airplane, monitor their progress, find, potentially aptitude, target them as targets for the future. And then, like you said, you can do T6 training and, almost to the point of attack, of flying in the simulator, and you can build people who are coming out of college who have almost all done the entire syllabus. So I think it has tremendous application. And we're looking for other places to apply that same kind of philosophy. I mean, because we're seeing real results. The other thing I say about these Pilot Training Next things is that they've only been in existence for a couple of years. And so once we got to the I believe button pushed by the Air Force and the Navy, they went off into some really aggressive, short-term, go get some stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. NOC TSD helped supply some of that. A lot of the companies, it's not very expensive, and it almost can be a consumable. So, I mean, it's not something that has to be 7-year acquisition process. So I really applaud the efforts that have gone on in all of those activities as an example of successful use of not only immersive environments, but these small-scale simulations. So tied sort of to that is the idea of LVC. I've got another 10 questions here that talk about the value of LVC. My experience, LVC is just getting to the point where the services have embraced it as with an ROI. So the CNO talked about doing large-scale exercises with LVC, across the globe. That's pretty dramatically, that's a really good thing. That's not, when I would try to inspire the Pentagon to go into LVC and fund LVC, say in the last 5-7 years, it was a risky thing, didn't want to put money against it, not sure what the ROI is. So can you all give me some examples of where the successful implementations of LVC are occurring, that we can use to build on the momentum?
Well, for the Marine Corps, we're expanding our use of force-on-force training systems as we look for the type of Marine leaders, cognitive, creative thinkers for the future. We're seeing that now where we are starting to build out the live piece of our virtual constructive training environment to the point where we've got very high fidelity, multi-entity level tracking, where what it's absent and what the Marines in the battle space are looking forward to is then how do we bake in the simulators? Where do we bring in the F-35s from the East and West Coast that you can't fly into the exercise of the evolution? We're looking for that. And we're starting to get youngsters to ask the questions of, is that going to be a piece of Google Glass that you give me that I can look up and see that simulator pilot actually flying in support of the exercise? The other piece that we're looking forward to that I think we need that's absent right now that is ripe for development is the utilization of artificial intelligence for the constructive side. This is alluded to by the senior leaders that were up here when we start talking about where's the mind of the enemy commander and can we generate that? So Mr. Petty with his colorful colloquialisms and great passion identified that we can probably use this to build out a red leader that we can exercise against. That's what we're looking for. It takes time and forces for us to use our own assets to be red force replicators. The more that we can do this in a live, virtual, constructive environment by using a constructive red replication or a virtual replication of it, again, the more firepower, the more capability that we retain to train the Blue Force. So we're just stepping into it, Admiral, and expanding where we are in our force-on-force training systems, but we're recognizing the absent spots across the rest of the spectrum.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Thank you, sir. So Admiral Gilday mentioned the large-scale exercise, and General Berger did as well. 5 fleets, worldwide, global, a lot of live there, and a lot of attempts at virtual and constructive there, and really good attempts. But I just wanted to underscore the problem you brought forth, and I wrote down stars, so I got to learn about that approach. When you put together these giant exercises, the challenge of proprietary, the challenge of cross-network, cross-domain is real, and then it only is worse when you start going joint. And then it's worse when you start going combined, and then we haven't even really thought about, well, we have thought about, I'm sure, partners that we bring in, and how much do we want to share with them, and how open do we really want to be with the balance of that architecture. But there's several great examples, and we could take you to a couple of different rooms and show you some of those, as I think you well know. But we've got a lot of work to do, and I really think that one of the keys to success is that ability to go cross-domain, cross-architecture, cross-service, and across partners and allies.
Anybody else?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, so we're stepping out into this space, I think, maybe like Kevin was saying, in the integration of some of our major weapon systems developments with virtual. So if you think about our integrated visual augmentation system and a combination, so that's a night vision and also some abilities during the day that mixes some augmented reality and a squad immersive virtual training capability together to combine live and virtual training and for mission rehearsal, for even mission execution, and then an AAR capability that we've never really had before. So it's going to take, I think, in our case, some tactical patience and some strategic patience as well to develop these capabilities so that we can use them in all the areas and in all the ways that we'll be able to realize over time. But we need enough of the early wins that provide us with a near-term capability that can later grow into, something greater.
Okay, so I have another sort of group question that comes out and says, all the services seem to be working on their own synthetic training environment program. And the question is, there's a concern that they're all going to be, stovepipe, potentially not suitable to a joint solution. So can you comment on that?
So I'll jump in there. So I mentioned the common synthetic training environment. One of the potential solutions for that we're looking at is the Navy-led JSE, right? That is the F-35 environment. Is specifically started out as a test environment, but has the potential to expand, be a training environment as well. So again, LCMCXA is looking at that very closely to see if JSE or elements of JSE might be part of the solution for the Air Force Common Synthetic Training Environment. But one of our approaches is also that it does need to be a joint solution. When you think electromagnetic spectrum, that is one of the models that we want in there, right? Yeah, it is space effects, surface effects, electromagnetic, and all the multiple levels of security that also has to go into all of that. So when you think about that, that has to be a joint solution. And while it's being Air Force led right now, we do have a mindset that it has to bring in our joint and then also bring in our coalition partners as well. And so probably one of the biggest challenges with that is the multiple levels of security, because each of the services have our own SAP, STO, SAR issues, and then we have the coalition partners and what gets shared and how we deal with the multiple levels of security. It's a tough problem, but it's one that's part of the CST solution as well.
Yeah, Alan, those are the things that we need to work together on, the protocols, so that we can quickly unify the stovepipes. But at the same time, I'll throw out a little chaos theory. One of our strengths is that we want to be cognitively agile. So there's a strength in the element of all of the services actually looking across, predominantly in their domain, but across all of the domains, and looking at what is the best solution for that service. Then what we need is we probably need a little bit of joint discipline to then pick out those pieces that are best and iterate forward. We've got to remember that 2030 is not the end state. So we don't want to pick out something that is just going to work for 2030. We need to continue to stay on a developmental scale that takes us beyond that, which means that we can't stop thinking. There will always be another great idea, and that's going to come from one of the different services that are sitting at the table. So let's not stifle that and push everybody into a one parochial pedantic box, but let's leave enough agility out there. Our Commandant talks about we probably only know what 20 or 75% of what we think force design will be. Let's leave 25% out there that gives us that thinking, cognitive flexibility for the future that lets us continue to design.
And I'll add that we can learn from what we're already doing in a joint fashion and in a combined fashion. So just last month, I went out to Coalition Virtual Flag at Kirtland Air Force Base. The Marine Corps extolled the value of that particular exercise. We had British, Canadian, Australian. I'm probably missing some of our coalition partners that were plugged in, and through distributed mission operations, DMO, we had players in England, Canada, and Australia all playing in the same exercise through a networked, but it was a challenge, right? So as I talked about, for that particular exercise, you had to go out and get all the connections for that particular exercise approved by all the authorizers. You couldn't change it once you had all the approvals, so it's not a very, it's not easy to approach it that way, and we need a better system that doesn't require that open architecture, data-defined approach is the way to go, so that you don't have to do that every time you need to pull players in and work on something together.
Okay, thank you for those answers. For our NATO representative, Can you tell us how NATO is approaching a lot of these interoperability problems, especially with exercises and live virtual constructive, and given that you already have a problem with 30 nations trying to bring, a known coalition together, maybe could you help us, further integrate our own efforts on the U.S. side?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. No, NATO is about interoperability, and it has been doing a fairly good job, and for 72 years. There's a lot of standards around it, and when people in the Army at least say what standards, they always think about 7.62 millimeter or 5.56 millimeter. There's a lot of other standards as well. And the standards in data and the standards in technology, it's a whole new chapter that has to be explored. The premier event for interoperability exercise is called CWIX, and that is a yearly exercise where people come together and test basically the technology and internet and data connections. ACT believes, my command believes that is the premier part to do this exploration and to see where the levels of ambition. But we clearly, as already stated before, the challenge between the pace of a technology and the pace or non-existing pace of security protocols is the biggest challenge. There is a big discrepancy. I do not have an answer, obviously, but something, either one thing will break or the other. But currently there is a discrepancy of it, and we see that every day. Mission federated network systems, the lessons I learned from Afghanistan, probably also ignored, but are we going to do that again? Et cetera, et cetera. On a smaller scale, when I was a brigade commander, I had 9 nations, sorry, then now it's 11. But okay, we had different rates. Even the NATO Type 1 crypto didn't work together because we had different radios which had different frequency modulation patterns. And that just, if that works on that is a challenge on a tactical level, then you can imagine where it is somewhere else. But it's only through exposing that, through exercises such as CWIX and others, and the bigger, larger exercises NATO does, Steadfast, Jupiter and Jackal, etc. Those are also platforms to expose these questions. So I invite everyone to, through their national representations or through other means, to take part of these. It's only when we expose and talk about it that we can find solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So probably the last question I'm going to ask today is we haven't really talked about new technologies. I mean, to the degree that 5G, AI, machine learning, those sort of things. Can you all address any kind of activity that you've got to try to go reach out and bring those kinds of things into your training systems or your acquisition system? Maybe the AI bot acquisition guy might have worked, but these are all out there. Cloud computing, they're there. So can you tell me if there's any effort to integrate them into the training system?
Yeah, so I go back to what I said earlier about requirements and resourcing and acquisition, and and also about time, the near-term readiness and future readiness. So some of the things that we're faced with, we can deliver capabilities that meet our warfighting requirements against a series of, over the POM cycles that we're dealing with, and not have to introduce additional risk. And then there are some things that for us to get to, as I described, it's an and, kind of like what Ilmars was saying. It's how do we deliver capabilities against the requirements we have in the near term, and then back to the risk discussion, secure future modernization capability. So what we do know today is some of the algorithms that we're training using AI are not going to be ready for us in the near term, but they will be ready for us probably in a couple of years. And so we're experimenting with those, and I alluded to it earlier, things like Project Convergence, which is, well, we did Project Convergence 21 just a couple of months ago, and we had participation from all the services, and next year in Project Convergence 22, we'll have participation by coalition. So you know, the extensibility of the networks, now we still have the same challenges of having to get an ATO that's specific for that activity, and we'll have to learn as we go through. But the ability to integrate things like artificial intelligence, some of the machine learning that we're using in robotics, those are several years out for us, I think, in terms of practical application. We can demonstrate the utility of those things today, but all of the illities that go with delivering a capability that we give to soldiers, reliability, maintainability, you know, all those things are difficult in the near term, but they're things we have to keep our eyes on for the future. I'll pause and see if anyone else has any comments.
Anybody else?
Robin, we need to quit sprinkling, you know, the acronym AI on everything. Hey, you know, I'll take me a little bit of that. Whatever you're building me, make sure that you sprinkle some AI on that. Let's do a better job of defining what the spectrum is from machine learning through where we think AI is now, where it might be for the future, and then we owe you a better definition of what we're expecting out of our systems, training systems, and fielded systems that need some element of that. Maybe all of them do not need high-end AI with a thinking type algorithm. Maybe they just need more of a fast transformation through algorithms that give you the big data lake collection of items that you need. So we owe you that out of AI. What do we think it is, and where is it going to take our force?
So I agree, and I just comment, you know, so when I ask people to tell me back what they think AI is, when they describe it to me, it sounds like a lot of things we were doing in the fire control radar and a Longbow Apache in the mid-1980s, you know. So it's a really fast way to access data in a lookup table, right? So we can do better than that, and I agree with you. We owe a description back about what can we do with the existing technology we have today, and what does really require some form of a machine that learns on its own, right? That's a wholly different thing in my mind. So I'll pause.
And one last comment I'd make on AI is we focus a lot on how we as a Blue Force will leverage AI to our advantage. I think one thing we need to keep in focus is how is the adversary going to use AI against us? And we need to create the systems that will look at how they're using AI so that we can train better and counter those approaches that the enemy will leverage AI to their benefit.
Yeah, to riff off of that a little bit, you know, to the definitional piece, and I smile because I hear the fairy dust all the time as well. AI, we just a dash of that and we'll be great. But you know, if you actually do any reading about it, you know, whether it's narrow AI, broad AI, general AI, or artificial superintelligence, all those things, and there's some great books about all of them. Some will scare you, but they're all really. It's really important to have the conversation about what is the desired outcome? What are we trying to achieve? Is it repeating an arduous task? Is it something we want to be faster at, or we do want somebody to think for us or help us make decisions? And then the other part you brought up that I'll riff on a little bit is I think we do ourselves a disservice, and General Berger talked a little bit about it, when we project our own value system on would-be adversaries. And what we think is the moral use of force using artificial intelligence, and you think unmanned, may or may not be what our adversary will or will not do. So I think it's a part of an ongoing conversation. I think a lot of us, to your point, General, we see that there's an incredible opportunity here, but we're not quite there yet when we're having a real conversation about what it can and should do for us going forward.
From a NATO perspective, the mindset is certainly changing. So the acceptance of new ideas and technology is on the rise. We have been even tasked to present demonstrations to the highest level of NATO, the highest level of NATO exercise called the CMX, Crisis Management Exercise. This involves ambassadors. It's the Polstrat level exercise. It's a yearly exercise at Brussels headquarters. And we are next year in the spring. We're gonna have an industrial demonstration of capabilities of AI prediction machines etc. out there. And 8 companies is going to show what they can in order to form an understanding or a level of mutual understanding amongst the political level on what they want to have. It's already a success that they want to see it. And then, of course, it's to formulate. But what is AI assisted decision-making system, I do not yet know. But that is why you have to expose it, etc. So that is interesting. 5G, we are doing experiment as well, but I can do that more later. Thank you.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think the AI discussion is needed and something that we'll take on from NTSA and NDIA because there's fear on one side that we're going to be overwhelmed with the enemies using it, and and then there's a what is it. I wrote some papers where we started out with an autopilot. It's sort of a artificial helper. So there's all of that, all the way to the ethics of the AI pulling the trigger, and that's a big topic. Maybe we'll have a whole symposium on that. But I just want to thank you for your time, and I just want to emphasize that there are 2 more panels. This afternoon is the Navy flag panel, and tomorrow the Marine Corps General Officer panel, and they'll probably dive into some more technical detail about a lot of the programs that are going on. But please help me thank the panel for their efforts. You are dismissed. Thank you, sir. Great job. Thank you.